This happened last summer. I'm 32 years old and live alone in an apartment outside the city. I had just moved in and got rid of a lot of old stuff, so I was sometimes checking Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace for furniture. The main things I needed were a coffee table and a TV stand, but I wasn't in a hurry, so I didn't mind looking for a few weeks. I remember it was a Monday night and I had just come home from work. While looking at Craigslist during dinner, I found a coffee table I liked. It was cheap, not too old, and in good shape. I sent an email, and within 20 seconds, I got a reply. The seller, Cole, said he could sell it to me, but it had to be that night because he was moving and planned to throw it out the next morning. With nothing else to do that night, I replied, "Sure, just tell me where to pick it up." He sent me the address, and I quickly looked it up on Google. The house was 25 minutes away in a neighborhood I had never been to before. I told him I would be there in an hour. Even though I was tired and it was late, I didn't mind going to get it. I was just happy to finally get a coffee table for my living room. I finished my meal, got in my car, and started driving. It was lightly raining, so I hoped the table wasn't too heavy and that we could quickly get it into my car without it getting wet. The drive felt long as I went through some winding roads until I reached a small, dark neighborhood. By dark, I mean there were very few streetlights, and most houses had their lights off. It was late, so I didn't expect many people to be awake, but the place felt a little spooky. When I found the house, it was a small, one-story place, and it was one of the few with lights on. As I drove into the driveway, I saw a man standing in the corner of the garage, looking for something. When I parked my car, the man looked at me and then quickly ran inside. I waited for a minute, thinking he would come back out, but he didn't. I got out of the car and walked into the garage, knocking on the door. After knocking again with no answer, I wasn't sure if I should go to the front door or just leave. I was starting to feel uneasy when the door suddenly opened. It was a different man from the one I had seen in the garage, but he introduced himself as Cole. He invited me in to see the coffee table. I followed him into the living room. The table looked just like in the pictures and wasn't broken, so I was ready to buy it. Cole started chatting about the new place he had just bought, but every time I tried to say I was ready to buy the table, he talked over me. It became uncomfortable, standing there for 5 minutes while he distracted me with conversation, as if he was trying to keep me there on purpose. I finally interrupted him and said I was in a hurry and needed to get home soon. He stopped talking and suddenly said I could have the table for free. Feeling suspicious, I agreed and then asked if he could help me load it into my car. We both grabbed the table and started carrying it through the house. It wasn't too heavy, but it definitely needed 2 people to move. We set the table down in the garage for a quick break, but then I heard someone running up behind me. A man wearing a mask and hoodie came from the side of the house, sprinting toward me. I froze, feeling scared and confused. The man didn't seem very aggressive, and Cole just stood there with a blank look. The masked man held up a knife and demanded my wallet and phone. I raised my hands, but I didn't feel scared enough to give in. He asked again, louder this time, but I decided to take my chances and ran for my car. The man lunged at me, but I kept running and managed to get inside and lock the door before he could do anything. I quickly backed out of the driveway and drove away fast. It was only then that I noticed a cut on my arm, slashed through my shirt. The man must have nicked me as I ran, but I hadn't even felt it in the heat of the moment. I pulled over a few streets away and called the police, giving them the address and descriptions of the 2 men. In short, the cops questioned Cole his real name, and after a quick interrogation, he admitted that the masked man was his friend. They had no plans to sell anything. They were just trying to rob me. It turned out this was their first time trying something like this, and they were nervous, which is why the whole situation felt so strange. Fortunately, the cut on my arm wasn't deep and didn't need stitches. Both men were charged, but not too seriously. Looking back, I'm glad I chose to run. If I had let them rob me, they might have felt more confident to keep doing it. But after this, I doubt they'll try it again. I know some people will judge me for this, but I used to use Craigslist a lot. I always met people in public places, talked to them on the phone first, and took every safety step before meeting anyone. For me, Craigslist was the easiest way to sell things I didn't need at home or buy stuff without spending too much money. For many years, nothing bad happened. I met lots of different people and bought or sold many things. But after one event, everything changed. I was looking for a bicycle and found a good one for a low price. It wasn't special, just a regular bike that the seller said worked well, which was all I needed. I emailed the seller to show I was interested, and they replied within an hour that it was still for sale. We had a quick phone call to figure out when and where to meet, and we decided on a gas station that was halfway between us. We agreed to meet at 6:30 p.m. On the day we were supposed to meet, I got to the gas station 15 minutes early. He told me he would be driving a blue Chevy truck, so I looked for it. After waiting for 30 minutes, he still hadn't arrived. The sun was starting to set, and I didn't want to meet in the dark, so I texted him to ask if he was on his way. A minute later, I got a call. "Sorry, I'm on my way right now. I'll be there in a few minutes," he said before hanging up quickly, leaving me no time to reply. He spoke fast, so I wasn't sure if I should worry about how rushed he sounded or if he was just in a hurry because he was late. I waited another 15 minutes before he finally arrived. The truck he drove was old and in bad shape, which made me unsure about buying from him. I got out to say hello. He was a man of average height, wearing loose clothes, and looked to be between 20 and 30 years old. To be honest, he looked unkempt. His hair was greasy, and his clothes looked like they hadn't been washed in a long time. He walked to the back of his truck and opened it, taking out the bike. To my surprise, it was in great condition. It wasn't fancy, but it was clear that it had been taken care of, which was very different from how the man looked. I did a quick check, rode the bike for a minute, and everything seemed okay. But as I started thinking more about it, my excitement began to fade. I started to think that the bike was probably stolen. After seeing the man in his truck, I doubted it could really be his bike. Even though it was 5 to 6 years old, it didn't have a single scratch or a speck of dirt on it. Once I thought it might be stolen, I couldn't get it out of my mind, and I knew I wouldn't feel comfortable buying it unless I was sure it wasn't stolen. Trying to be subtle, I asked, "So how long have you had it?" "A few years," he replied, not giving me any helpful information. I asked why he wanted to sell the bike, thinking it was a normal question, but his answer surprised me. "What does it matter? It works, right?" he snapped, looking at me with an impatient and rude face. I found it ironic that he was acting impatient after making me wait so long. I told him I didn't want the bike anymore, wished him a good night, and tried to open my car door. But before I could fully open it, he slammed it shut. "Nah, you're buying it." "I didn't come out here for nothing," he said. I could tell things were getting bad, but since there were a few cars and people around the gas station, I wasn't too worried. I calmly told him I was concerned about where he got the bike and that I wouldn't buy something that didn't belong to him. He hesitated for a moment, then suddenly pushed me against my car yelling for me to give him money. He hit me again, and I had no choice but to pull out my wallet and give him all the cash I had. Without saying anything else, he jumped back into his truck and sped away, nearly causing an accident as he left the gas station. I looked around at the few people nearby, 3 or 4 of them, who had just watched everything happen. None of them stepped in to help, and none stayed to be witnesses afterward. The police never found him, so I lost $100. But more than that, I started to lose faith in humanity. No one cared to help, but they all wanted to watch me get beaten and robbed in public. A few months ago, I put an old laptop for sale on Craigslist. It worked well, but I got a new one for work and didn't need 2. I was only asking for $80, which was a good price. After a few days with no replies, I mostly forgot about it. Then, a week later, I checked my emails and saw a message. The person wanted to know if the laptop was still for sale and if they could come see it. I replied, and later that day, they told me they could come by tomorrow. We decided to meet at 5 o'clock. That night, I realized I didn't even get their name. Their email address looked more like a gamer name, so it didn't help me. I didn't think much of it, thinking they just didn't notice the email they were using. The next day, I sent my address a few hours before we were supposed to meet. Since it was my day off, I would be home all day. By 4:30, I checked my emails again, but they hadn't replied to my last message. I thought they didn't need to answer, so I wasn't worried. I opened the blinds to see when they arrived, then sat on the couch and turned on the TV. I sat there for almost an hour, watching TV and looking out the window now and then, but no one came. Since we hadn't talked since the day before, I thought they changed their mind and weren't coming. I didn't worry too much and just went on with my evening. By 8 o'clock, I was falling asleep on the couch, drifting in and out of sleep, when I suddenly woke up to a noise coming from my back door. After I woke up, I got up to see what was going on. I looked out the back door but didn't see anything. Just to be sure, I turned on the porch light, but the backyard was empty. The noise I heard was hard to figure out since I wasn't fully awake, but I thought it might have been someone trying to open the door. I walked around the house to make sure all the doors were locked and looked out the windows to see if I could see anything. That's when I heard a knock at the front door. Quietly, I walked up and looked through the peephole. There was a man, maybe in his late 30s, pacing back and forth on my porch, talking to himself. He stopped, came back to the door, and knocked again. "Who is it?" I asked, keeping the door shut and looking through the peephole. He stared at the door for a moment before saying he wanted to talk to the homeowner. The way he talked with a stutter and slurred words made it clear he was either on drugs or not all there. I decided not to say anything else. After a few moments, he called out again, saying he really needed to talk to me. He kept pacing, and it was getting more and more creepy. While I watched him, I quietly took out my phone and called 911. While I was on the phone, the guy knocked again, but then suddenly ran off the porch toward my garage. I quickly grabbed my newer laptop and opened the live feed from my security camera above the garage. On the video, I saw his car parked at the top of my driveway, just inches from the garage door. The guy was now using a crowbar, trying to pry the garage door open. He looked wild, and it scared me. After trying a few times, he went back to his car, searched through his glove box, and then came back to hit my garage with the crowbar a few times before finally driving away. Even though I gave the police the security footage of the man in his car, they were never able to find out who he was. It's still unclear if this was related to my Craigslist post, but I believe it was. I have no idea what that guy wanted or what he would have done if he got inside.